Mary Ellis had walked no more than a few yards beyond the iron gates when carriage lamps appeared through the rain. The black coach passed her. Then the wheels slowed. A crest on the black door caught the lamplight. Calder, she recognized, and warm light spilled from the open door as a dark-haired gentleman leaned toward the rain. Mary tightened both hands around the small case containing everything she owned. The Duke of Calder looked from her soaked dress to the locked gates behind her. "Were you turned out of that house tonight?" Mary did not answer at once. Behind those gates waited the wages Lady Fairfax had refused to pay, the character she had promised never to give, and the accusation Mary had refused to make against an innocent servant. The Duke's gaze returned to her face. Mary lifted her chin. "Yes, Your Grace." His carriage remained where it was. The road stretched empty in both directions. Rain fell steadily. The nearest inn was 3 miles, and the dark made that feel like an optimistic estimate. "The inn is several miles from here." His voice was level, practical. "You know it. I don't know what happened inside those gates, but I will not leave a woman to walk that road alone. If you agree, you may sleep at my house tonight. My housekeeper will see you placed with the women there. I'm expected at Fairfax House and must return, but in the morning I will have you taken to the inn or wherever else you choose." He did not move from his seat. He did not offer his hand. Mary looked at the gate, at the road, at the man who had just said, "If you agree." "Do you know Lady Fairfax, Your Grace?" "I am expected at her table this hour." Mary considered it for 3 seconds, then picked up her case and stepped in. She sat nearest the door. Rain drummed against the roof. "Lady Fairfax dismissed me without wages and without a character," she said, watching rain trail down the glass. A jeweled clasp went missing from her dressing room. She accused the under-housemaid. She expected my word to support the charge. Julian waited. "I did not see the girl take anything. I would not say I had." "Do you believe she was innocent?" "I believe I did not see her steal anything. That ought to be enough." He did not push further. The carriage moved, and neither spoke again until the long drive at Calder House came into view. The entrance hall was warm and well lit. Mrs. Bell, a trim woman with grey at her temples, received Mary without ceremony. Julian gave 3 instructions: a dry room, placement with the women, breakfast, and a carriage at 7. He said it precisely, leaving no uncertain edges. Then he turned back toward the coach. The lamplight narrowed behind him as the carriage went on into the rain, back toward Fairfax House. The dining room there was golden and formal, Lady Fairfax at the head, with the ease of a woman who had never once sat somewhere she did not belong. Cecilia was to Julian's left, composed, attentive. Julian ate and listened, and, in the second course, mentioned that he had encountered a dismissed servant on the road. Lady Fairfax answered without any shift in composure. The maid had been insolent, a clasp had gone missing, the under-housemaid had been in and out of the dressing-room all week. Mary Ellis had refused to confirm it. One expects loyalty from a woman in that position. "Did Miss Ellis see the girl take the clasp?" Julian asked. A small pause. "Not exactly, but servants must understand when their word is required for the good order of a house." Julian looked at his plate and said nothing. Across the table, Cecilia watched his face and chose not to fill the silence. Mary was packed and sitting on the edge of the bed at 6:30. She had, during the night, found a torn cuff on a hanging gown and mended it, not to be noticed, but because leaving fixable things unfixed was not her habit. That morning, she had untangled a young maid's disastrous attempt at formal hairdressing in under 4 minutes. Mrs. Bell had seen both. At 7, the housekeeper appeared with tea. One of her women was away attending her mother. There was a house party in 10 days. You need wages, I need competent hands. We may both survive the arrangement. Mary set the cup down. Did His Grace order this? He did not. She insisted the position be under Mrs. Bell, the wages recorded, the eventual character based on her actual work. Mrs. Bell agreed without fuss. Mary unpacked her case. Over the days that followed, she learned Calder House by its rhythms, which bell belonged to which upper room, which maid always mislaid the curling irons. She grew useful quietly, and Mrs. Bell let her be. Julian she saw occasionally in the entrance hall, and there was no occasion to stop. On the 4th afternoon she came through from the service passage with pressed garments when the front doors opened and Lady Fairfax entered, Cecilia at her elbow, drawing off her gloves. Ellis. The name was spoken the way one might call back a misrouted letter. Mary stopped, both arms full. Lady Fairfax turned to Mrs. Bell, who had appeared at the corridor doorway. Are you aware this woman was dismissed from my household without a character? I am aware she was dismissed. She has proved herself competent. I hired her on trial. A dismissed maid without a written character is not a suitable hire for any respectable household. Mary stood where she was and held the garments. A footman crossed the far passage. The clock measured the silence. Cecilia set her gloves on the side table and said nothing. Julian came in from the library. He looked at Mary, arms full, going nowhere, and then at Lady Fairfax. Do you accuse Miss Ellis of theft, dishonesty, improper conduct? She was insubordinate. Declining to give testimony she could not support is not grounds for dismissal in this household. Mrs. Bell hired her. She answers to Mrs. Bell. Lady Fairfax looked once more at Mary, then continued into the drawing-room. Cecilia followed. Carriages arrived before noon on the appointed day of the party. By supper, the upper corridor was lined with trunks and garment boxes. Mary moved through the preparation with the calm of someone who had managed worse, assessing gowns, organizing dressing rooms, answering questions from ladies who assumed their needs were urgent. 40 minutes before the first formal dinner, Mrs. Hargreaves discovered that the back seam of her gown had split. Mary appeared, assessed in 3 seconds, told Mrs. Hargreaves to face the mirror and stand still. 18 minutes later, the woman descended the main staircase, already speaking to her companion about road conditions, the gown invisibly restored. Julian was in the entrance hall when she passed. He watched her go, then found Mary in the back passage returning needles to their case. You prevented a catastrophe. A torn seam is a catastrophe only for someone who has never had to repair her own clothes. I have never repaired my own clothes, Julian said. Mary glanced at his coat. I had already assumed as much. He laughed, briefly, quietly, and remained in the doorway a moment longer than the conversation required. Then he went. Dinner proceeded below. Mary returned garments to 3 separate dressing rooms before the upper corridor finally quieted, still searching for the ribbon Mrs. Bell had mentioned putting in the blue case. Not there, apparently never there, when she passed the morning room for the 3rd time. You have passed this door 3 times tonight, Julian said. He was in his shirt sleeves beside the hearth, a book open across his knee, and the fire burned well down without him attending to it. The page, she noticed, was the same one it had been both previous times. The ribbon is avoiding me, not the other direction. Come in for 5 minutes. Whatever you're looking for has survived this long. The door stayed open. A footman was still moving somewhere down the hall. Mary went in and sat in the chair across the hearth. The fire was better than it looked. Julian looked at the book, then set it aside without pretending further. She observed he had been on the same page for some time. He blamed the difficulty of the page. She suggested the book might simply be dull. He conceded the possibility and said she was severe with a man offering his fire, that he should be quite disappointed if a warm room were enough to earn her admiration. Mary held her hands toward the flames. "I am only trying to prevent you mistaking gratitude for something else." "Then we are both safe," he said. The log shifted against the grate. A brief curl of sparks rose and died. The footsteps in the corridor had moved further away. "Service itself is not what I object to," she said, to the fire rather than to him. "The work is honest. It has always been honest. What I object to is that one sentence from someone above me removes everything, a character, a position, years of careful conduct, and there is nothing to be said in answer. People stop asking what a servant thinks once they have decided what her position means." Julian was quiet long enough that she thought he would let it pass. Then, "Everyone asks what I think. Most of them have already decided to agree." He looked toward the book. "I am sometimes uncertain whether anyone speaks to me honestly." "That sounds a remarkably comfortable burden." "It is." He did not qualify it. "I know the difference between our situations. You have no recourse. I have too much. I am not suggesting any equivalence." Mary stretched her hands closer to the fire. He saw the reddened index finger before she drew them back, the needle, caught twice that afternoon. "You injure yourself often for a profession you defend so fiercely." "Only in places people seldom notice." Julian did not touch her hand. He reached across and moved the fire screen several inches toward himself, so the warmth fell more fully on her chair. A maid passed in the corridor outside. Her footsteps were unhurried and then gone. Mary looked at the mantel clock. 5 minutes became 20, Julian said. She rose. "Your page survived." He picked up the book. Barely. The ribbon turned up the next morning in the second blue case. Mrs. Bell had neglected to mention there were two. 2 days after the last guest departed, Mary found the book on the window seat outside the morning room and carried it to find Julian. He was in the carriage court, speaking with the coachman about the rear wheel, and turned when he heard her on the gravel. "It was on the window seat," Mary said, and held it out. Julian tucked it under his arm. He suggested pleasantly that she might have been attempting to rid the house of it on his behalf. Mary pointed out that Mrs. Bell would object to her disposing of his Grace's property without permission. They were both heading toward the kitchen garden and walked that direction together without particularly arranging to. "Did you ever find the ribbon?" "Yes." Mrs. Bell neglected to mention there were 2 blue cases. "I had been searching the wrong one for 3 evenings." Julian said nothing, which was its own kind of comment. At the far end of the path, a housemaid crossed ahead of them carrying the second blue case, plainly visible. Mary watched her go. "I prefer not to discuss the matter further." One of the maids came looking for her at the garden turn with a question about an alteration, and she left Julian at the path. Later, folding the last of the muslin in the linen room, she heard Mrs. Bell's step, and the door shut behind her. Word had come from Fairfax House. The jewelled clasp had been found caught in the satin lining of Lady Fairfax's travelling cloak. A brief note had reached Lucy's family. Nothing had reached Mary. "The matter may be settled for Lady Fairfax," Mary said. "Lucy was called a thief in front of the household. I lost wages and the only character I had." She smoothed the edge of the fold. "That does not vanish because the jewel reappeared." Mrs. Bell said nothing because there was nothing to add. Lady Fairfax could no longer pursue the theft question, and so observations began circulating instead about the strangeness of a dismissed maid so established in a duke's household. These arrived at Calder House in fragments. A visiting maid's overheard remark, a guest who paused before addressing Mary, a morning when a delivery man had clearly heard something in the village. At the next formal dinner, Julian looked toward the corridor 3 times before the first course was cleared. Mary was there, an evening wrap over one arm as she attended a female guest, performing for no one. Cecilia, seated to his left, noticed and said nothing at table. Afterward, she set her cup down in the hall, while the other guests moved toward the drawing room. Our families have expected an arrangement for some time. I am not prepared to marry a man who has chosen elsewhere and lacks the honesty to say so. I would rather disappoint our families now than spend 20 years disappointing one another. Julian said nothing. Cecilia walked to the pianoforte and played something charming and did not look at him again. The guests remained several more days. On the 3rd morning, a younger maid relayed to Mary, without any sense of its content, one of Lady Fairfax's insinuations, something about influence and how a dismissed servant had come to be so comfortably placed. Mary thanked her and sent her back to work. Then she went to her room and took out the small case from beneath the bed. She was packing, one blouse folded in, then another, when Julian appeared in the workroom doorway. "You will not leave because Lady Fairfax has decided to spread gossip." Mary pressed the lid of the case flat. "That is very easily said by the person gossip cannot make unemployable." He stopped. She set the case aside and moved to the wardrobe drawer. "You want to prevent the harm. But Lady Fairfax's gossip costs me a position and costs you an inconvenience. Wanting to prevent something and being able to prevent it are not the same." He was about to answer. He did not. "What would make staying your choice?" Julian asked. She turned. "Employment under Mrs. Bell, wages formally recorded, a written character at the close based on what I have actually done here, and freedom to leave when I choose. Those conditions already exist. Say them plainly, to me." He did, straight through, without equivocation. Mary looked at the case on the bed. Then she reached over and began to unpack. She returned to work the following morning. Calder House had an assembly coming, and the preparations occupied the household. On the night of the assembly, the rooms filled with candlelight and guests, music from the far end of the house, and Mary was near the cloakroom, attending to wraps, as she always had been. Lady Fairfax found her there. "You seem to have forgotten what you are. Controlled, pleasant." Mary handed a wrap to the footman and turned. "I have forgotten nothing, my lady. That is precisely why I declined to say I saw what I did not see. Lucy was innocent. The clasp was found in your cloak." The corridor had gone still. Julian came from the drawing-room doorway and stopped at the edge of the group. "Miss Ellis lost her wages and her written character because she would not purchase her own safety at the cost of an innocent girl's reputation. I find that a better recommendation than the one you declined to write." Lady Fairfax turned to him. "Your family's expectations, Your Grace." "There is no engagement," Cecilia said from the drawing-room threshold, clearly enough to carry across the hall. "There never will be one built on expectation alone." Julian confirmed it with a brief inclination. Lady Fairfax put on her gloves, said something quiet to Cecilia about the hour, and withdrew. Music resumed from the far rooms. Guests collected their cloaks in ones and twos. Carriages were called, the pegs emptied. By the time the last carriage departed and the entrance hall went quiet, the fire in the morning-room had burned well down. Julian found Mary there. She sat in the chair across the hearth without needing to be asked, her hands in her lap. Julian sat opposite. After a moment, "The arrangement with Cecilia was wrong for both of us. She knew it." He met her eyes. "I would like permission to call on you, properly." The wood shifted in the grate. "Yes," she said. He called the following Thursday and the ones after. Mary's free hours were not always available. She sometimes sent word that Mrs. Bell needed her, which was generally true. They walked when the weather allowed. On one Thursday he arrived to find only Mrs. Bell in the hall. Mary was still in the upper dressing rooms. Julian settled into the hall chair with the same book that had been defeating him for 2 months. When Mary came downstairs 20 minutes later, she found him still there, on the same page. Most dukes, she remarked, would simply have interrupted. Julian closed the book. "This one is a tempting improvement." Outside it had stopped raining. He offered his arm at the door. After a beat, she took it, her gloved hand settling on his sleeve. He adjusted his pace to hers. "What would you do?" he asked after a little while, with an afternoon that served no particular purpose. The question stopped her. She thought about it, which itself was unusual enough. "Walk somewhere without carrying anything," she said finally. Julian glanced at her hands, which were empty. He had not offered her his book, his gloves, or anything else to hold. "How are we doing?" he asked. She laughed, briefly, genuinely, the kind that surprised her into it, and then looked at the path ahead. They spoke of easy things, the groundskeeper's opinion about the coming frost, a title Mrs. Bell had recommended, whether the kitchen garden wall was earning its keep. The mornings arrived colder. The leaves thinned along the western path. When the difficult book appeared on a later walk, Mary noticed the spine. "Have you finished the page?" "Eventually." I found the company improved the experience considerably. By November, frost had silvered the western path. Mary and Julian had nearly reached the turn above the lower meadow when he stopped walking. She took another step, felt the absence of him beside her, and turned. "The first evening I met you," he said, "I thought stopping the carriage was the useful thing. I know better now." "What was?" Mary asked. "Stopping long enough to ask what you wanted." He held her gaze. "I know what I want now. I would still prefer to ask." "There is one condition," Mary said. Julian waited. "You must never mistake becoming a duchess for becoming agreeable." "I abandoned that hope some time ago," he said. She looked at him for one unguarded moment. Then yes, yes. Mrs. Bell knew by supper and mentioned only that the chapel would want extra candles in December. Julian was already at the front of the small Calder chapel when Mary reached the doorway. December light came thin and pale through the windows. Mrs. Bell was in the front row, back straight, her best coat pressed smooth. Cecilia was seated across the aisle and caught Mary's eye as she entered, giving a brief, entirely sincere nod, the kind that had no performance in it. Snow had threatened all morning and held off. Julian watched Mary come toward him and forgot entirely to look at anyone else. Afterward, in the entrance hall, Cecilia offered her congratulations in 3 sentences and meant all of them. Calder House settled into married life. Mrs. Bell remained its authority. Some weeks after the wedding, a young maid knocked a glass scent bottle from the dressing-table shelf. It shattered on the floor, and the girl appeared in the morning-room doorway shortly after, clearly expecting the worst. Mary looked up from the letter she was writing. Was anyone hurt? The girl said no. Then clean it up carefully and ask for help if you need it. Julian, in the far armchair, returned to his papers. Eleanor Calder sat on the morning-room hearthrug with her father's terrible book open upside down across her knees. Eleanor was 3 now, serious, and already possessed of strong opinions about most things, including how books ought to be held. 4 years had brought Thomas as well, younger, and currently asleep against Mary's shoulder in the chair to the right. Julian came in from the outer hall, damp from the weather, and stopped. "She found it on the low shelf," Mary said. Julian retrieved the book from Eleanor's lap, turned it right side up, and offered it back. Eleanor considered the text in its corrected orientation and found it less interesting. She climbed to her feet and went to look at the fire instead. "She has finally found someone who appreciates it," Mary said. "She cannot read." "That may explain it." Julian crossed to the hearth, lifted Eleanor before she could get too close to the grate, and settled her on his knee in the chair opposite. Eleanor accepted this provisionally, then decided she wanted the book after all, and held out her hand for it with considerable authority. Julian gave it to her. She turned to a page in the middle and examined it with great seriousness, upside down again. Thomas made a small sound against Mary's shoulder and subsided. Rain ran down the window glass in long, uneven lines. The fire had been built up well. As the afternoon darkened, the nursery maid brought Thomas's outdoor things and helped Eleanor into her coat, and Eleanor advanced arguments, eventually successful, in favor of carrying the book to the Harlows' early family supper. She went ahead with a footman, her voice audible from the doorway as she explained her requirements to the night air. The carriage stood beneath the entrance lamps, rain falling steadily beyond the circle of lamplight. Julian held the door. Mary paused for one beat at the step. The lamp burned warm inside. The seat was dry. She took Julian's hand and stepped up. Eleanor was already established on the forward seat, the book open across her knees. Mary settled beside her, Thomas warm against her coat. Julian climbed in and pulled the door closed. Rain fell beyond the lamplight. Eleanor turned a page. The carriage moved. And that, my dukes and duchesses, was the story of Mary Ellis, who walked into the rain with nowhere to go, and found a duke willing to stop his carriage and ask what she wanted. I hope her story has found you well. If you would be so kind, do let me know what you thought of Mary and Julian's tale. Until we meet again, thank you most sincerely for watching.